Okay, so um, let's unpack this. We all kind of think we know how the American Revolution kicked off Lexington and Concord, right? The famous shot heard round the world.
Yeah, that's the standard story.
But what if I told you that weeks before all that, a seemingly small act right here in Virginia nearly lit the fuse?
The gunpowder incident. Yeah,
Okay.
it's fascinating how often these major historical shifts aren't really born from grand pronouncements alone, but they bubble up from these, localized events that suddenly expose deeper tensions and force people to take sides.
Exactly. And today, we're taking a deep dive into just such a moment. The gunpowder incident of April 21st, 1775 in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Right in the colonial capital.
Yeah, we've got a collection of historical accounts, and our mission really is to understand what went down, who the key players were, and why this, well, seemingly minor event is actually a pretty significant piece of the puzzle leading up to the revolution.
Definitely, it's often overlooked.
So for you listening, consider this your backstage pass to a crucial moment in history, one that doesn't always make it into the standard telling.
Okay, so setting the scene. If we connect this to the bigger picture, by early 1775, the air in the colonies was thick with suspicion and unrest.
Hmm.
You had the Intolerable Acts. These were really punitive laws passed by the British Parliament after the Boston Tea Party, seen by many colonists as just a direct attack on their freedoms.
A real slap in the face.
Absolutely. And the First Continental Congress had already suggested the colonies start forming their own militias. This was partly a reaction to the powder alarm up in Massachusetts.
Right, where Governor Gage took the gunpowder.
Exactly. And that understandably made people very uneasy about their ability to defend themselves. That incident really highlighted the Crown's willingness to, well, disarm the colonists if they felt like it.
Right, so the colonists were already on edge, thinking, what might happen next? How would they protect themselves? And Virginia was no different. They started organizing their own militia companies
Makes sense.
and naturally began looking to secure military supplies. Muskets, powder, the necessities.
And this raises a really important question about who held the power, right? From the British perspective, particularly that of the Royal Governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore.
Ah, Dunmore.
Yeah, these independent militias arming themselves were a direct challenge to his authority, to royal control. So his response wasn't just passive observation, it was a deliberate attempt to prevent the Virginia militia from getting those supplies.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. It seems like it wasn't until after Patrick Henry's incredibly powerful Liberty or Death speech in late March that Dunmore felt a real sense of urgency.
That speech really lit a fire, didn't it?
It seems so. Even though British troops had been withdrawn after that earlier a powder alarm in Massachusetts, the Royal Navy still had a presence in the Chesapeake Bay. And on April 19th, now get this, just 2 days before the incident we're focusing on, Dunmore secretly brought a company of British sailors into Williamsburg and housed them right there in the governor's mansion.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a pretty bold move, right? Sneaking armed sailors into the heart of the capital.
It absolutely is. That secret deployment speaks volumes about Dunmore's growing distrust of the Virginians and his willingness to take proactive, even underhanded measures to maintain control. It's a clear sign that the relationship between the governor and the governed was, well, rapidly deteriorating.
Absolutely. Then, in the early hours of April 21st, like middle of the night stuff,
Mm.
Dunmore ordered Captain Henry Collins of the HMS Magdalen to remove the gunpowder from the magazine in Williamsburg.
The main storage place.
Exactly. And this wasn't a small amount. We're talking about 15 half barrels of powder.
It's 15. That's significant.
Huge amount. These were loaded into the governor's wagon and started heading down the Quarterpath Road to be loaded onto the Magdalen, which was waiting in the James River. And the location, we even have descriptions of it, the octagonal Williamsburg magazine right in the center of the colonial capital. Can you just picture the symbolism of that? Emptying the colony's ammo cache.
Oh, definitely. The image of that octagonal building, a central storehouse of the colony's defense, being emptied under the cover of night is incredibly powerful. It wasn't just about the physical loss of the gunpowder, it was a potent visual statement of the crown asserting its dominance and stripping the colony of its ability to resist.
Well, it definitely got people's attention. The townsfolk quickly realized what was happening, and the alarm bells started ringing. Literally, I picture church bells, maybe some frantic shouting.
Chaos.
Pretty much. Local militia began to gather, and riders were dispatched to spread the news throughout the colony. Now, Dunmore, clearly anticipating some kind of reaction, had even armed his own servants with muskets.
Wow. armed his servants.
Yeah. You can feel how close things were to erupting into violence right then and there. It is teetering on the edge.
But what's crucial to understand here is the role of the Patriot leaders, figures like Peyton Randolph, who was the Speaker of the House of Burgesses.
Right, a respected figure.
Exactly. They stepped in and really urged calm and restraint, skillfully preventing what could have easily become a bloody confrontation right there at the governor's mansion. Their ability to de-escalate that immediate tension was vital in preventing, premature conflict.
It really was. And the Williamsburg City Council, they were having none of it. They formally demanded the return of the gunpowder, rightly arguing that it belonged to the colony, not directly to the crown.
Good point. It was colonial property.
Exactly. Now, Dunmore's initial explanation was interesting. He claimed he was moving the powder to safeguard it from being seized during a supposed slave uprising.
The convenient excuse, perhaps.
Well, later on, he rather unconvincingly admitted it was more about being prudent, after Patrick Henry's fiery speech.
Yeah.
So which was it?
That shifting explanation is really telling, isn't it? It suggests he was likely testing the limits of colonial tolerance, perhaps unsure of how far he could push them.
Yeah, probing.
And that initial claim about a potential slave uprising is particularly interesting because it reveals the deep-seated anxieties and the complex racial dynamics that were always simmering beneath the surface of colonial society, playing the fear card.
It definitely does. But his explanation didn't really satisfy anyone for long. Even after the initial crowd dispersed, a palpable tension remained in Williamsburg, and news of Dunmore's actions was spreading like wildfire through the Virginia countryside.
You can imagine the rumors flying.
Oh, yeah. And when another crowd had to be talked down, Dunmore's response took a really aggressive turn. He reportedly threatened to declare freedom to the slaves and reduce the city of Williamsburg to ashes if he or his men were attacked.
Whoa, that's extreme, threatening to arm the slaves against their masters and burn the capital.
Exactly. And he even reportedly told a local official that while he had fought for Virginians before, he could certainly fight against them too. Those are fighting words.
Those are incredibly inflammatory and revealing statements. They paint a picture of a governor feeling increasingly isolated and, frankly, desperate, resorting to threats that would have had the most profound and terrifying implications for the colonists.
Especially the slave freedom threat.
Oh, absolutely. The very idea of Dunmore inciting a slave rebellion was a deeply held fear in the southern colonies, and to use it as a threat shows just how far the relationship had broken down. There was no trust left.
None at all. And right around this time, news of Lexington and Concord finally reached Virginia,
The timing.
further igniting the already tense situation. So by April 29th, you had nearly 700 militia members gathered in Fredericksburg. They were ready to march on Williamsburg.
700. That's a serious force.
Yes, but again, cooler heads initially prevailed. Peyton Randolph, and even George Washington, who was highly respected, advised against immediate rash action.
Interesting. Even Washington was urging caution at this point.
Yeah, so the Fredericksburg militia narrowly voted against marching right away. It was close, apparently.
That moment really underscores the internal debates, doesn't it? And the strong desire, at least among some of the leadership, to avoid all-out conflict if there was still any other path. They were walking a very precarious tightrope, trying to balance asserting their rights with the risk of triggering a full-scale war.
A very fine line. But then comes Patrick Henry.
Of course, never one to sit back.
Not at all. The Hanover County militia, galvanized by the news and perhaps feeling that this more cautious approach wasn't working, voted on May 2nd to march on Williamsburg.
Okay, so they weren't waiting.
Nope. And Henry, never one to back down, dispatched a small company to Richard Corbin's house. Corbin was the deputy collector of royal revenue with a demand for payment for the seized gunpowder using crown funds he was holding.
Going after the money. Smart.
Right. The rest of the Hanover County militia, about 150 strong, started heading towards Williamsburg, arriving just about 15 miles outside the city on May 3rd. That's a pretty decisive move, marching on the capital.
Henry's actions here are pivotal. He wasn't just asking for the return of the powder anymore. He was demanding a form of compensation, a tangible acknowledgement that the crown's actions were unacceptable. It was a direct and bold challenge to royal authority.
Definitely upping the ante.
Yeah, and it's around this time that Dunmore's family, clearly feeling the immense pressure and the escalating danger, fled Williamsburg.
They claim him, really.
No. They initially sought refuge at his hunting lodge, Portobello, and then ultimately took shelter on the HMS Fowey, a British warship in the York River. The governor's family abandoning the capital. That's a bad sign for royal authority.
Huge sign. So back to Henry and Corbin. Corbin wasn't even at home when Henry's men arrived. He was actually in Williamsburg meeting with Dunmore.
Huh. Convenient. Or maybe not so convenient for Corbin.
Right. But Carter Braxton, who was Corbin's son-in-law and, importantly, a Patriot member of the House of Burgesses, stepped in.
Okay, a negotiator.
Exactly. He managed to persuade Henry to halt his march and not enter the city while Braxton went to negotiate a payment. He rode back and forth, apparently.
Trying to prevent bloodshed.
Seems like it. And the very next day, May 4th, Henry received a bill of exchange for £330 as payment for the powder.
So they paid up.
They did. And here's a key detail. Henry insisted that the payment come from a wealthy plantation owner, Corbin. Basically not directly from Crown accounts. It's like he wanted to make a specific point about who was paying.
That detail about the source of the payment is incredibly telling. It really highlights the colonists' growing rejection of direct royal control over their resources and their increasing sense of self-governance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's symbolic.
It wasn't just about the money, it was about asserting who had the authority. And once he had that payment in hand, Henry, mission accomplished for now, headed off to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress,
Off to bigger things.
promising to deliver the funds to the Virginia delegates there. So he basically took the money meant for the crown and gave it to the revolutionaries.
Pretty much. But Dunmore was definitely not going to let this go without some kind of retaliation. On May 6th, he issued a formal proclamation denouncing Henry for extortion
Trying to paint him as a criminal?
and essentially warning people not to offer him any support. Of course, this backfired spectacularly.
As these things often do.
Right. It only seemed to further solidify Henry's image in the eyes of many as a courageous patriot standing up to tyranny. He was even offered protection by several counties as he made his way to Philadelphia. He became even more popular.
So what we witness here is a direct and rather ironic consequence. Dunmore's attempt to discredit Henry only served to elevate his status and further erode the governor's own legitimacy and authority in the colony.
Oops. Big oops. But as you hinted earlier, that wasn't the end of the story, was it? Things didn't just calm down.
Not at all. Relations between Dunmore and the House of Burgesses continued their downward spiral. It was just constant friction.
And then in early June, there was another really unfortunate incident back at the magazine itself.
Oh, right, the booby trap.
Yeah. Apparently, the British had rigged a spring gun, basically a loaded gun set to fire if disturbed to protect whatever military stores remained there. And it tragically ended up wounding 2 young men who'd broken in, probably looking for leftover weapons or just snooping around.
Ouch! That's awful and politically disastrous for Dunmore.
Absolutely. This understandably ignited even more widespread outrage and anger among the local population. It felt like a deliberate trap set for the colonists.
Yeah, that incident seems like a real turning point. It not only caused further physical harm, but also completely shattered any remaining semblance of trust between the governor and the people of Virginia. It was just a stark reminder of the antagonistic relationship that had developed. No going back, really.
None at all. And on June 8th, facing this escalating hostility and sensing the complete loss of his authority, Dunmore and his family secretly fled the governor's palace in the dead of night.
Abandoned ship, literally.
And sought refuge again on the HMS Fowey. This moment effectively marked the end of royal control in Virginia. The governor was now ruling from a warship.
Can't really govern effectively from offshore.
Not really. And interestingly, around this very time, the House of Burgesses was actually considering a conciliatory proposal from the British government Lord North's plan.
An olive branch of sorts.
Yeah, but in the wake of Dunmore's dramatic flight, they ultimately rejected it. It's like Dunmore's actions fleeing the capital sealed his own fate and the fate of royal authority in the colony. His running away made reconciliation impossible.
It's a powerful illustration of how actions, especially those driven by fear or perceived weakness, can have unintended and far-reaching consequences. Dunmore's attempts to assert control ultimately led to its complete and rather ignominious collapse in Virginia.
Definitely ignominious. And even though Dunmore didn't give up easily, he tried. He continued to try and regain control, even leading British forces in various skirmishes from his naval base.
Conducting raids, causing trouble along the coast.
Exactly. But he was decisively defeated at the Battle of Great Bridge in December of that year, 1775. That was a major Patriot victory.
Yeah, cleared the British land forces out of Virginia proper.
It did. And after more raiding and eventually burning Norfolk, he finally abandoned Virginia for good in August 1776. Sailed away.
By which point, the Declaration of Independence had happened.
Right. By that point, Virginia was being governed by a committee of safety, and in July 1776, Patrick Henry, the man Dunmore had tried to discredit as an extortionist, became the first elected governor of the independent Commonwealth of Virginia. Talk about a reversal of fortune.
It's incredible. So when we really dig into this seemingly localized gunpowder incident, we can see a very clear and significant trajectory. It wasn't just about some missing gunpowder in Williamsburg.
Not by a long shot.
No, it was a crucial early confrontation that laid bare the deep-seated tensions, showcased the colonists' growing determination to resist royal authority, and highlighted the pivotal leadership of figures like Patrick Henry. It undeniably accelerated the shift of power in Virginia and arguably set the stage for what was to come in the broader revolution. It showed the royal government was vulnerable.
Okay, so what does this all boil down to for you listening? The key insight here, I think, is that the gunpowder incident, while it might not be as widely remembered as Lexington and Concord, was a really critical early flashpoint in the lead-up to the Revolution.
Absolutely critical for Virginia.
It powerfully demonstrated the rapidly escalating tensions and the colonists' increasing resolve to stand up for what they believed was right, even before the major battles had begun. This seemingly contained event had profound implications for the direction things were heading in Virginia and, by extension, beyond.
Indeed. It powerfully illustrates a crucial early dynamic in revolutionary movements. Even seemingly small acts of defiance and localized confrontations can quickly expose and amplify underlying power struggles, forcing decisive action and revealing the unwavering will of the resisting faction. It put the crown on the back foot, locally at least.
So here's a thought for you to really chew on as we wrap up. Considering the swift and decisive actions taken by individuals like Patrick Henry in this very early stage of the conflict.
Right, marching on the Capitol.
How might this early display of colonial will, and frankly, the Crown's somewhat clumsy response through Dunmore, have shaped not only the broader strategy, but also the overall confidence of the American revolutionaries in the challenging years that followed? Could this early win in Virginia have given them a crucial psychological edge?
That's a deeply insightful question. It really compels us to consider the psychological dimensions of these early confrontations, doesn't it? How even relatively minor victories, like forcing the governor to pay for the powder or flee the capital, could have a significant impact on the morale and long-term trajectory of a resistance movement. Did it make them bolder?
Definitely something to think about. If you found this deep dive into the gunpowder incident as fascinating as we did, I really encourage you to delve further into the figures and events of the early American Revolution.
There's so much more there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You might be surprised to discover just how many seemingly minor incidents actually hold incredibly significant keys to understanding the major historical shifts that followed. There's always more to the story.